Brothers and sisters, what you are about to hear changed my life forever, and if you allow me these next 30 minutes of your time, I guarantee it will change yours too. After 5 minutes of this story, you will understand why a billionaire from Poland wept like a child in the presence of Christ, and in 15 minutes, when I reveal what I saw about the future of our technology, you will understand why I woke up screaming in that cancer hospital. But the most shocking thing, brothers and sisters, is what will truly shake your soul. I will show you in 20 minutes when Jesus himself taught me the terrible price we pay for greed in this life and in eternity. My name is Ricardo Hernandez Vega, and until 3 years ago, I was exactly what you would think when you saw my apartment in Santa Fe, my 3 luxury cars parked at Antara, and my office in Tuamara overlooking the entire Valley of Mexico. He was a successful businessman, owner of a restaurant chain that stretched from Tijuana to Mérida, with more than 200 employees and revenues that exceeded 50 million pesos annually. He lived in that golden bubble that only those who have experienced the power of unlimited money know, where every whim comes true and every wish is realized with a simple bank transfer. But brothers, let me be brutally honest with you, because if this story is impacting you, if you feel that something inside you resonates with what I'm saying, it's because perhaps, like me, you have allowed ambition to cloud your heart. I was one of those men who measured success by the number of zeros in my bank account, who saw my employees as numbers on a spreadsheet, who justified every cruel decision with the phrase I repeated like a mantra every morning while shaving, staring at my reflection in that mirror in my strange marble bathroom. Business is business, Ricardo, and feelings don't pay the bills. For 15 years, I built my empire step by step, restaurant by restaurant, laying off entire families when profits didn't meet my expectations, closing branches without caring that 50 people were out of work overnight, raising prices while cutting salaries, always with that smile I had perfected for business meetings, that mask that hid what had truly taken over my soul, a greed so deep it had killed any trace of compassion I may have ever had. And if you think I'm exaggerating, if you think I'm maybe dramatizing to get your attention, let me tell you what happened that cold dawn of December 15, 2021, when my chauffeur found me collapsed on the floor of my office at 3 a.m., surrounded by contracts I had just signed to close 5 more restaurants and lay off 200 families just before Christmas. The heart attack had been so sudden, the doctors at Angeles Hospital told me later, that I was technically dead for 7 full minutes. 7 minutes that changed not only my perspective on life, but my entire understanding of it, what we really are and where we go when this body stops forever. The first moments after the heart attack were like plunging into absolute darkness, but not an empty darkness, but a heavy, dense darkness, filled with a presence I couldn't define, but which filled me with a terror I had never experienced before. I could hear in the distance the desperate voices of Drive Ramirez and his team shouting medical orders, the shrill sound of machines, but I was floating somewhere between life and death, aware of everything, but completely disconnected from my physical body lying on that hospital gurney. Suddenly, brothers, and this is something no one can understand until they experience it firsthand, I began to see scenes from my life projected before me like a movie, but not just any movie, but one where I was simultaneously the protagonist and the most critical spectator. I saw the exact moment when I decided to fire Maria Gonzalez, a 52-year-old woman who had been working at my restaurant in the Roma Norte neighborhood for 8 years, not because she was a bad employee, but because earning 18,000 pesos a month seemed too much for a cashier who had already lost the agility of her younger years. But what really tore my heart out, brothers, was seeing her that afternoon when I gave her the news, sitting in the chair in front of my desk, her trembling hands clutching her fake purse, tearfully telling me that her husband was sick with cancer and that without this job she wouldn't be able to afford chemotherapy. I perfectly remember that at that moment, all I thought about was how uncomfortable her crying made me, how her personal drama was interfering with my productivity that afternoon. I handed her a severance check, telling her with that coldness I had cultivated over the years, Maria understands that this isn't personal, it's simply a business decision. Now, seeing that scene from this spiritual perspective, I could feel each of Mary's tears as if they were a knife piercing my chest. I could experience her desperation, her humiliation, her terror at the uncertainty of not knowing how she would survive. And 10 minutes into this story, brothers and sisters, when I tell you what Christ showed me about the true weight of each of our actions, you will understand why I began to cry uncontrollably in that dimension between life and death, why every fiber of my being began to grasp the magnitude of the damage I had caused with my insatiable thirst for wealth. But the review of my life didn't stop there, because evidently the universe had much more to show me. I saw the moment when I decided to raise the prices of all my menus by 40% during the pandemic, taking advantage of the desperation of families who went out to dinner as their only moment of happiness amidst the confinement. I saw how I manipulated contracts with local suppliers, small producers from Sochimilco and Milpa Alta, who trusted I promised them payments I knew I would never make within the agreed-upon time frame, forcing them to accept increasingly disadvantageous terms because they had families to feed and I was their only important client. I vividly remember Don Jose Martinez, a 68-year-old farmer from a highland Milpa who grew the most exquisite chilies my palate had ever tasted, who came to my office in March 2019 begging me to pay him the 300,000 pesos I owed him for 6 months of deliveries. He arrived dressed in his best guayabera shirt, which had probably been white for many years but had been dyed a pale yellow by time and work, carrying a basket of fresh chilies as a gift. Hoping to touch my heart with his generosity, I received him between meetings, constantly consulting my gold Rolex, making him feel like his presence was a nuisance, and I said, without even looking him in the eye, Don Jose, understand that cash flow is tight this quarter, but I promise you that next month we will definitely pay off the debt. That was an absolute lie, because that same day I had bought a BMW 7 Series for 900,000 pesos, money that I could have easily used to pay this man who got up at 4 a.m. every day to grow the produce that made my restaurants successful. Don Jose died 4 months later of a heart attack. I found out by chance when his son came to my office asking me to please pay his father's debt so he could pay for the funeral. I signed the check that day, not out of compassion, but because my lawyer warned me that there could be legal problems if the family decided to sue me. Brothers and sisters, if this story is stirring something inside you, if you feel that perhaps you too have made decisions that have hurt others in pursuit of your goals, stay with me because what comes next will change the way you view every peso you earn, every decision you make, every opportunity you have to help or harm someone else, because after reviewing the darkest moments of my business life, something extraordinary began to happen in that dimension where my soul hovered between life and death. The darkness gradually began to dissipate, like when the sun rises after the most intense storm you can imagine, but this was no ordinary dawn. It was a light that didn't come from any specific place, but seemed to emanate from reality itself, a warm, golden light that immediately filled me with a peace that starkly contrasted with the anguish I had been experiencing. And in the midst of that light, brothers, a figure appeared that I don't have enough words to describe, because all the images, all the paintings, all the representations you had seen of Christ throughout your lives fall short of the reality of his presence. He wasn't as tall as some artists paint him, nor did he have the perfectly manicured beard we see in churches. He was a man of average height, with wavy brown hair that reached his shoulders, skin tanned from years of work under the Palestinian sun, and hands that clearly knew manual labor, with calluses that spoke of a life of service. But what really struck me, what made me recognize him instantly, without a doubt, it was his eyes, brown eyes that contained infinite depth, a wisdom that encompassed the entire history of humanity, but above all, a love so pure and complete that it disarmed me completely. He was dressed in a simple beige tunic, without ornaments, without jewelry, without any of the ostentation I had associated with power and importance all my life, and when he spoke, his voice had a timbre that resonated not only in my ears, but in every fiber of my being, with an accent that reminded me of the fisherman of Pátzcuaro, whom I had known in my youth, simple, yet full of authority. He told me, and the way he pronounced my name made me feel like he had known me since before I was born. "You have come here because it is time for you to understand what you have truly done with the life you were given." There was no judgment in his voice, no condemnation, but neither was there the permissiveness I had hoped to find. It was simply the truth, pure and direct, like a scalpel that cuts cleanly to heal. "Lord," I replied, and I was surprised at how easily those words came to my lips, considering it had been over 20 years since I had set foot in a church, except for weddings and funerals. "I know I made mistakes, but I always worked hard. I was always honest in my tax returns. I always complied with the law, even in that spiritual dimension." Brothers, my first reaction was to justify myself, to defend my actions, as if I were at a shareholders' meeting presenting my annual report. Christ smiled with an infinite sadness that broke my heart and said, "My son, the law of men and the law of love are very different. Come, let me show you what you consider success from a different perspective." Suddenly, the space around us transformed, and we found ourselves standing in what seemed to be my office into a mare, but seen from a dimension that allowed me to perceive not only what had happened physically, but also the spiritual and emotional consequences of every decision I had made there. I saw the scene with Maria Gonzalez again, but this time I could experience not only her pain, but the pain of her ailing husband when she came home that afternoon with the news of his layoff. I saw how that night he stayed up until 4 a.m., staring at the ceiling of their small apartment in the doctor's office, mentally calculating how many more weeks he could afford his treatment with the savings they had. I saw Maria crying silently in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear her, wondering if she would be able to get another job at her age with the economy so tough and the competition so fierce. "See, Ricardo?" Cristo asked me, with that voice that was at once infinitely tender and infinitely powerful. "When you made that decision based solely on numbers, on quarterly profits, on financial reports, you forgot that each of your employees is not a statistic, but a child of mine, a person with dreams, fears, families that depend on them. The money you saved by firing her, the 18,000 pesos a month you no longer had to pay, became for you one more glass of aged whiskey, one more dinner push, one more of those shirts that cost 3,000 pesos, but for Maria, it became sleepless nights, medicines she couldn't buy, tears she shed when she thought no one was looking." 18 minutes into this experience that I'm sharing, brothers and sisters, Christ was going to show me something even more devastating, how my greed had created a chain of suffering that extended far beyond what I could imagine. But first, I want you to understand that what I'm sharing with you isn't just my story, it's a mirror in which perhaps many of us can see ourselves reflected because we live in a society that has taught us that success is measured in pesos, in properties, in clothing brands, in the model of our cell phone. But Christ continued to show me what I had considered smart business decisions from a completely different perspective. We saw together the moment when I decided to close the restaurant in the Naples neighborhood because profits had dropped 15% for 2 consecutive quarters. For me, it had been a logical, mathematical, unquestionable decision. A business that doesn't generate enough profit must close, but now I could see the human consequences of that decision as ripples that spread in ever-widening circles. I saw Roberto Sanchez, my pastry chef, a 35-year-old man who had worked for me for 6 years, arriving home in the Agricola Oriental neighborhood that Friday afternoon. When I gave him the news of the closure, he had to tell his wife, Patricia, that she was pregnant with their second child, that she no longer had a job, that their plans to move to a bigger apartment would have to be cancelled, that they might have to ask their in-laws to let them stay in their house until he found something new. I saw Roberto that night, sitting on the edge of their double bed, which they had bought on credit and were still paying for, his head in his hands. He felt like he had failed as a provider, as a husband, as a future father. I saw Patricia wake up at 2 a.m., and find him motionless and ask him what was wrong. I saw the exact moment when he had to tell her, trying to sound strong but with a cracking voice, "Love, they closed the restaurant, we're going to be okay, I'll find something soon." I promise. But Christ showed me something that tore me apart even more. I saw how Roberto, in his desperation to get quick money to support his family, took a job at a fast food restaurant where the owner exploited him, making him work 12 hours a day for half the salary I was paying him. I saw how the stress and humiliation of being overqualified for that position began to affect his marriage, how Patricia began to blame herself for the pregnancy that had complicated their finances, how her 4-year-old son stopped smiling because he could feel the tension in the house, even though he didn't understand what was happening. And do you know what you did with the money you saved by closing that restaurant, Ricardo? Christ asked me, and although his tone remained loving, I could sense an infinite sadness in his words. You invested in renovating the decor of your house in Cuernavaca. You spent 200,000 pesos replacing furniture that was perfectly fine, simply because you were bored with the previous design. 200,000 pesos, my son, that could have kept that restaurant operating for 6 more months. Enough time for Roberto and the other 8 employees you fired to find new jobs without the desperation that led them to accept undignified working conditions. Brothers and sisters, if you are feeling something in your chest as you listen to this, if something inside you is shifting uncomfortably, it is because the Holy Spirit is speaking to you through this story. It is because perhaps you, too, have made decisions where you have put your comfort, your whims, your desires above the basic needs of others. And I'm not just referring to the business owners listening to me, I'm referring to all of us, because at some point we have all had the opportunity to help and have chosen to spend the money on ourselves. But what Christ was going to show me next was what truly changed me forever, because he took me to a dimension where I could see not only the immediate consequences of my actions, but also how greed had infected my soul in ways I had never suspected. It took me to a place I don't know whether to call vision or revelation, where I could see who I really was, not who I had deluded myself into thinking I was. Look at your heart, Ricardo, he told me, and suddenly, it was as if my chest had opened and I could physically see what was inside. What I saw horrified me, because instead of the pink, healthy heart I expected to find, I saw something black, hardened, covered in what appeared to be golden chains that squeezed it ever tighter. Each chain was engraved with the name of one of my possessions: my apartment in Santa Fe, my house in Cuernavaca, my cars, my bank accounts, my investments, my restaurants. This is what greed does to the human heart, Christ explained to me. Every time you put the accumulation of wealth before the well-being of others, every time you choose profit over love, a new chain forms around your heart. These chains don't disappear when you die, Ricardo, you carry them with you into eternity, and the heavier they are, the more difficult it is for your soul to find the peace I want to give you. But, brothers, what was shown next was even more shocking, because it led me to see what happened to the souls of people who had died completely dominated by greed. I saw a place that wasn't exactly the hell I'd been taught in catechism as a child, with fire and horned demons, but something much more subtle and therefore more terrible. It was a place where souls were completely alone, surrounded by all the riches they had accumulated on earth, but unable to enjoy them, unable to connect with other souls, unable to feel love or be loved. I saw a man I recognized as Carlos Slim. Although Christ warned me not to judge because every soul has its own path, he sat on a golden throne surrounded by millions of pesos, but with an expression of absolute emptiness on his face, because he had discovered too late that all the money in the world can't buy him a second of true happiness, not a moment of authentic human connection. I saw him desperately trying to touch the coins that held him, surrounded them, but his hands passed through them like ghosts, because he had spent so much time accumulating wealth that he had forgotten how to love, and without love, it has real substance. This is the true curse of avarice, my son, Christ told me with a sadness that broke my heart. It's not that the rich cannot enter the kingdom of heaven, it's that when someone loves money more than people, when someone worships possessions more than the Creator, their soul shrinks until it can no longer contain love. And without love, heaven becomes impossible, not because of my punishment, but because they have lost the capacity for love, to experience the one thing that makes heaven heaven. the perfect union with infinite love. I began to cry uncontrollably, brothers, because I recognized myself in that description. I remembered all the nights I had arrived home from my apartment after a successful day of business, surrounded by luxuries that most people can only dream of, yet feeling completely empty, completely alone, unable to genuinely connect with my wife, my children, even with myself. I remembered how I had gradually lost the ability to enjoy the simple things: a sunset, a conversation without an agenda, a hug without a reason, because everything in my life had to have a commercial purpose. Everything had to generate some kind of profit. Lord, I said to him through my tears, there is hope for me. I can change. It is too late for my soul to regain its capacity to love. And the smile he gave me was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, because it was filled with a hope that I didn't deserve, but that he offered me freely. It's never too late as long as you're still breathing, Ricardo replied. But change isn't going to be easy, because you have to be willing to let go of everything you've believed defines you. You have to be willing to break those golden chains you forged around your heart, and that will hurt more than any physical pain you've ever experienced, because those chains have become part of your identity. And then, brothers and sisters, Christ showed me something that no human being should ever see, but that I needed to see to fully understand the urgency of changing my life. He showed me the future that awaits us if we continue down the path of greed and extreme materialism. He led me to a vision of the world in the year 2030, just a few years in the future, where technology had advanced to the point that the differences between rich and poor had become so extreme that they practically seemed like different species. And cities divided into physical levels, where the ultra-rich lived in glass towers suspended in the air with their own water and air purification systems, while below, on the ground, millions of people struggled to survive in a polluted and almost uninhabitable environment. I saw how artificial intelligence had replaced 80% of jobs, but all the benefits of that increased productivity had been concentrated in the hands of an ever smaller elite, while the masses relied on government assistance programs that kept them just on the brink of survival. But most disturbing, brothers, was seeing how this extreme inequality had divided humanity not only economically but spiritually. I saw how the ultra-rich had developed a technology that allowed them to transfer their consciousness into artificial bodies, believing they had conquered death, but unaware that in the process they had lost their souls. I saw how they literally worshipped their algorithms and machines, creating a new religion based on efficiency and productivity, where human suffering was seen simply as an inefficiency of the system that needed to be eliminated. Despite where the path you're following leads, Ricardo, Cristo asked me, isn't it just your soul that's in danger? It's the soul of all humanity. When people like you, who have power and influence, choose greed over love, you create structures that perpetuate suffering for generations. Your decisions today are building the world of tomorrow, and that world will be a reflection of the values you choose to live, and also how in that dystopian future, churches had been replaced by corporate meditation centers where people learn techniques to be more productive in their jobs, but where love, compassion, and sacrifice for one's neighbor were never discussed. I saw how the word God had been replaced by the word algorithm, and how people prayed to their smartphones, hoping that artificial intelligence would solve all their problems. Brothers and sisters, 25 minutes into this story I'm sharing with you, Christ is going to show me the alternative, the path of hope that is still available to all of us. But first, I need to tell you what he told me about the specific responsibility we have as people blessed with financial resources, because that vision of the future terrified me so much that I began to beg him to tell me what I could do to prevent that nightmare from becoming a reality. Those who have much, much will be asked of them, he told me with the authority that only God can have. You have received business intelligence, you have received opportunities that millions of people will never have. You have received resources that could feed entire families for years. All of this was no coincidence, Ricardo. It was for you to use as an instrument of my love on earth. Every peso you have is sacred. Every business decision you make is an opportunity to bless or to curse. Every employee you hire is a child of mine that I have placed under your care. He showed me then how businesses should truly operate from a divine perspective, not as machines to extract the most money possible, but as communities where every person involved, from the CEO to the cleaning employee, could flourish as a human being. He showed companies that existed in other parts of the world, where the owners had understood this principle, where profits were distributed equitably, where investment was made in the emotional and spiritual well-being of employees as much as in the physical infrastructure, where every decision was made asking, not only will this generate more money, but this will generate more love, more justice, more opportunities for people to grow. I saw a company in Denmark where the owner had decided that the difference between the highest and lowest salary could not be more than 10 times, ensuring that all employees could live with dignity. I saw a factory in Costa Rica where a system had been implemented where extra profits were automatically invested in education programs for employees' children, creating a virtuous cycle where the company's success directly translated into opportunities for the next generations. This is what I expected from you, Ricardo, Cristo told me, and for the first time in this entire experience, his voice had a tone of reproach that pierced me like a bolt of lightning. I expected you to use your talent to create decent work, to generate opportunities, to be an instrument of my providence in the lives of hundreds of families. Instead, you used your intelligence to create systems of exploitation, to maximize your personal benefit at the expense of the suffering of others. But, brothers, just when I thought I was going to be consumed by guilt and despair, Christ took me by the hands and said something that changed everything. But I didn't bring you here to condemn you, my son. I brought you here to offer you a second chance, a chance to return and build a completely different legacy. Are you willing to let go of everything you've believed yourself to be to become who I truly believe you are? In that moment, brothers, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life. I had to choose between maintaining my identity as Ricardo, the successful entrepreneur, the respected billionaire, the man who had conquered the business world, or becoming someone completely new, someone I didn't know I had the courage to be. Yes, sir, I replied in a voice that surprised me with its firmness. I'm willing to change, but I don't know how. I've lived so long being this person that I don't know who I am without the money, without the power, without everything I've built. Christ smiled with that infinite tenderness that had been accompanying me throughout this entire experience and said, the first step is to understand that you are not what you possess, Ricardo. You are my beloved son, created to love and be loved, created to be a channel of blessing in the lives of others. Everything else is simply tools that you can use to fulfill that purpose or that can become obstacles if you love them more than people. Then he showed me something that filled me with a hope I didn't know existed. He showed me what my life could look like if I made the right decision. I saw my restaurant chain transformed into something completely different, where every employee received a living wage, where there were education and personal development programs, where profits were reinvested in creating more job opportunities and supporting community programs. I saw how I could use my business experience, not to accumulate more wealth, but to teach others how to create businesses that were economically sustainable, but also spiritually nourishing. He showed me a future where my house in Cuernavaca became a retirement center for low-income families who had never had the opportunity to take a decent vacation, where my luxury cars were sold to create a fund to provide college scholarships for the children of my employees, where my apartment in Santa Fe was transformed into offices for non-governmental organizations working to combat poverty in Mexico City. But Cristo, I asked him with an anxiety I'm ashamed to admit even now, what will happen to me? How will I live if I give all this away? How will I support my family? How will I pay my expenses? And the laugh he let out was so full of joy and love that I immediately realized how ridiculous my question was. Do you really think that I, who feed the birds of the sky and dress the lilies of the field, am going to abandon you when you finally decide to live according to my will? Ricardo asked me, what I am asking you to let go of are the chains that have kept you prisoner. I'm not asking you to live in poverty, I'm asking you to live in true abundance, the abundance of love, purpose, and inner peace that comes from knowing you're fulfilling the plan I have for your life. He then explained something to me that completely revolutionized my understanding of what it means to be prosperous. True prosperity is not measured by how much you accumulate for yourself, but by how much you can give without lacking anything essential. A man who can clothe, feed, and provide decent housing for 100 families is infinitely more prosperous than a man who accumulates wealth for himself but lives in constant fear of losing it. Brothers and sisters, at that moment something broke inside me, but not painfully, but rather like a dam bursting and the water can finally flow freely. For the first time in decades, I felt complete peace, absolute certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be, hearing exactly what I needed to hear. I accept, Lord, I said, and as I spoke those words, I physically felt those golden chains that had been squeezing my heart fall away one by one. I accept to completely change my life. I accept to use everything you have given me to serve others. I accept to become the person I was always meant to be. Christ embraced me then, brothers. And that embrace was like receiving forgiveness for all the mistakes I had made, the healing of all the wounds I had caused, the restoration of all that I had lost by following the wrong path for so many years. It was like being reborn, like discovering for the first time who I really was beneath all the masks I had worn, all the false identities I had built. Now, he told me, it's time for you to return, but first, I need to warn you of something important. The path you have chosen is not going to be easy. Society will criticize you for going crazy, your family will resist change, your associates will try to convince you that you are making irrational decisions, but every time you feel like you are lacking strength, every time the temptation to return to your old ways is too strong, remember this moment, remember what you have seen here, remember that I am always with you. Suddenly, brothers, I began to feel a strange sensation, as if I were being pulled down by an invisible force. The figure of Christ began to gradually fade, but his voice remained clear until the very end. Go and transform everything you touch into an instrument of my love. Be the entrepreneur I designed you to be from the beginning, someone who uses their talents to multiply blessings, not to accumulate curses. The next thing I remember is waking up in that bed at Anjali's hospital, surrounded by machines constantly beeping, with my wife Carmen crying at my bedside, and Ramirez checking my vital signs with an expression of total amazement. It's a miracle, I heard him murmur to a nurse. He was technically dead for 7 minutes, and normally that causes irreversible brain damage, but all his tests were perfect. But I knew the real miracle wasn't that my brain was functioning normally after 7 minutes without oxygen. The real miracle was that my heart was finally functioning properly after decades of being sick from greed. For the first time in over 20 years, I felt whole, I felt at peace, I felt connected to a purpose that went far beyond accumulating money. The first thing I did when I was discharged, 3 days next, I gathered all my employees in the event hall of the Presidente Intercontinental Hotel in Polanco. They arrived confused, some worried that I was going to announce more layoffs or the closure of more restaurants. Many of them had worked for me for years, but I had never really seen them as people, but rather as human resources, as numbers on a payroll. Colleagues, I said, and it was the first time in my life that I used that word to refer to my employees. For the past 15 years, I have been a bad employer, and first and foremost, I want to apologize. I have made decisions that have hurt you and